Hey everyone, and welcome. Today, we're diving into the story of a fascinating and, I think, seriously underrated king from ancient Judah, Jotham. His story is all about foresight, faith, and preparing for a storm that was gathering just over the horizon. Let's get into it.
So let's start with this big question. Can you imagine spending your entire rule building up defenses, strengthening walls, and creating a powerful military, all for a conflict that would only truly explode after you were gone? Well, that's pretty much the story of King Jotham.
So where does Jotham's story even begin? Well, it wasn't your typical handoff from father to son, not by a long shot. His path to the throne was, you could say, pretty unconventional.
Okay, so Jotham's dad was the powerful King Uzziah, a guy who had a really long and mostly successful reign. But a pretty tragic event in his father's life is what pushed Jotham into the spotlight way sooner than anybody expected.
Here's what happened. Around 750 BC, King Uzziah got struck with leprosy, a huge deal back then, after he illegally went into the temple. Because of the disease, he had to live in isolation. So his son Jotham had to step up. He began what's called a co-regency, which basically means he was running the whole kingdom for his dad. For all intents and purposes, he was king in everything but name. So the Bible gives us a pretty clear report card on Jotham. He's remembered as a good king, one who followed God like his father had. But there was one big but. He didn't tear down the high places. Now, these were these local shrines scattered around the country where people would offer sacrifices. And look, for the folks writing this down, that was a huge no-no. It took worship away from the main temple in Jerusalem and, a lot of the time, got mixed up with local pagan stuff. It's a really important detail that shows you just how complicated religion was on the ground.
But Jotham's time in charge wasn't just about keeping the seat warm. No, he kicked off one of the most ambitious building sprees the kingdom of Judah had ever seen.
You've got to picture the world he was living in. The ancient Near East was a rough neighborhood, always. And right at this time, you have prophets like Isaiah and Micah warning that foreign armies were coming if the people didn't get right with God. So it seems like Jotham had this two-part strategy. Yeah, be a faithful king, but also understand that faith alone isn't going to stop a siege engine. His building projects were a totally clear-eyed, strategic move to get ready for what was coming.
And man, just look at this sheer scale of what he did. He built up the temple's upper gate, he massively reinforced the wall of Ophel, which was a critical defensive spot in Jerusalem, but he didn't just stop in the capital either. He went out into the countryside, started new cities, and built this whole network of forts and watchtowers out in the forests. This wasn't just putting up buildings. This was creating a defense in depth for the entire kingdom.
And here is where things get really cool. This is a perfect example of how history and archaeology can line up. Archaeologists digging today in that same Ophel area of Jerusalem have found these enormous fortifications that date right to the 8th century BC, exactly when Jotham was king. The stones in the ground are literally telling the same story we read in the ancient texts. How amazing is that?
But Jotham wasn't just a builder hiding behind his new walls. Nope. He was also a proven military commander who knew how to project power when he needed to.
Over to the east of Judah, you had the Ammonites, a rival kingdom. Jotham didn't just play defense. He took the fight to them, won a major victory, and basically brought them under his control, securing that entire border.
And the victory was so total that for 3 years in a row, the Ammonites had to pay this absolutely massive tribute. We're talking 100 talents of silver. That's a fortune, plus huge amounts of wheat and barley every single year. Now, to be clear, this wasn't just a symbolic payment. This was a massive injection of wealth and resources right into Judah's economy. Okay, so Jotham's building up his kingdom, he's winning his local wars, but all the while, a giant storm was gathering on the horizon. A new superpower was making its move.
In 745 BC, this guy named Tiglath-Pileser III becomes king of Assyria. And he wasn't just a king, he was a machine, an empire builder. His army started marching west, just gobbling up smaller kingdoms, and suddenly, all of Jotham's construction projects make perfect sense. He was building for this.
And this is one of those moments where history just clicks into place in the most incredible way. The Bible tells us that late in Jotham's reign, 2 kings, Rezin of Damascus and Pekah of Israel, started making trouble for Judah. So what do we find in the Assyrian records from the same time? We find inscriptions from Tiglath-Pileser himself listing the exact same 2 kings, Rezin and Pekah, as guys he fought and defeated. It's a stunning, independent confirmation of the whole political scene.
So as Jotham's life is winding down, it's clear he accomplished a lot. But his real, true legacy? That would only be tested after he was gone.
Let's just put this on a timeline to see how fast things were moving. Jotham starts ruling around 750 BC. Just 5 years later, the Assyrian threat becomes very real with Tiglath-Pileser. At the exact same time, you have the great prophets Isaiah, Hosea, and Micah on the scene. And then, around 735 BC, Jotham dies, right on the cusp of this massive regional crisis boiling over.
So here's the bottom line, the big takeaway from Jotham's reign. His legacy wasn't an era of peace. It was an era of intense preparation. He handed his son, Ahaz, a kingdom that had strong walls, a full treasury, and a battle-tested army. He did everything a king could possibly do to get his nation ready for the coming storm.
And that leaves us with this final, hanging question. It's the cliffhanger, isn't it? Jotham built the physical defenses. He provided all the tools for survival. But leadership is about more than just walls and money. It's about wisdom and courage and faith. The stage was set, the storm was here, and now everything was on the shoulders of his son. What was Ahaz going to do?